Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show all of you how to do vertical sorting or sorting based on the y-axis for a 2D game using the universal vendor pipeline inside of Unity. So first I'm going to start by opening up a new project with 2D URP, of course. Give it whatever project name you want, and I'll hit create project. So in the new project, I'll go ahead and import some art assets in. So these I'm taking from the Modern Interiors pack on itch.io. So when you're importing your 2D sprites, something that is going to be important to keep in mind is your pivot location. So by default, if you're doing vertical sorting, it's going to sort by the center of your object. But a lot of 2D objects are actually going to have the base of their body be on the lower side of it, not in the center. So this is supposed to be a sound amplifier. If you think about it, it would stand on the ground. So your actual center base point would be much closer to the ground, somewhere like right around here, and not up here in the middle. So when you slice up your sprite sheet, you're going to want to customize the pivot and change it from center to something like custom, and find a good offset position for that. So here I'm just going to bring it down to where I think the base would be. And you can see the custom values in the bottom right-hand corner. So that's going to end up being about 0.5 and 0.25. I'll manually type in those settings, and you can see that that puts the pivot here. So when I slice, I'm going to do custom, and I want 0.5 for X and 0.25 for the Y. So we slice it, and now each of the pivots are going to be that exact value, regardless of which frame of animation we do. So go ahead and apply that in your sprite editor when you're importing. So I'm going to do the same thing for this character sprite sheet as well. Put sprite mode in multiple because there's multiple frames. Let's apply it, open up the sprite editor, and I'm going to slice. So in this pack, the character frames are 16 pixels wide by 32 high. So we're going to need a custom pivot as well. Let's, for now, set it to center, and I'll hit slice. And now we can click on each frame and see that the pivot point is way too high. This would be sorting based on the head of the character, which doesn't make any sense at all. So first I'll click on the first character frame. I'll move this pivot point down to the feet, probably right around there with the yellow. So that's going to give us approximately a value of 0.5, and I'm going to round this up to 0.05 for the Y sorting position. So right there close to the bottom. So let's go ahead and slice, and I'll change pivot to custom. So we want 0.5 for the X and 0.05 for the Y. Slice all of the frames, and we can see that the pivot is now correctly positioned for all of the frames. So let's apply that and exit the editor. So to make the pixel art objects bigger in this demo scene, I'm just going to change the pixels per unit for all of these assets to 16. This is not required. It just depends on how big you want your units to be, as in each of these little squares. Otherwise, you need to scale your camera up and down. So now if I drag this museum entrance into the scene, it's a lot more appropriately sized for the camera. So this is just our background. Now let's drag a single frame from the sound amplifier to, let's say, right there. And then I'm going to drag a single frame from this character into here. So first I want to point out that your first method of sorting is going to be sorting layers. So wherever you have a sprite renderer, if you change the order in layer or the sorting layer, you can have stuff render behind or in front of other layers. So obviously something like this background map would probably go on a different sorting layer. So I'll just go ahead and add a background layer here. And the background layer I'm going to move above default. So default will be characters and other stuff that moves around in the game. And even if I give a negative value to the order in layer for the character now, it should always show in front of the background. And the reason it hasn't right now is because I haven't assigned the background layer to the actual background. So if I change that, then our character pops up. Now, because the character has a -10 order in layer compared to the sound amplifier as a 0, then the character is always going to show in back of the sound amplifier. But what we want to happen is dynamic sorting between the character being in front, like right here, and behind the sound amplifier. Because if you think about it, you should be able to walk behind the sound amplifier because it's really, in physical space terms, only taking up probably this one square. So having a character walk behind objects in 2D games like trees or big bookshelves and that kind of thing is actually really common. So how do we manage that third level of sorting? So First off, the two objects that we need to dynamically sort are going to have the same order and layer of value. So the sound amplifier and the character both have a 0. And then we need to customize the universal render pipeline settings. Before that, I'm just going to quickly add a movement script to the player to make it so that we can move him around and test the dynamic sorting. So I'm just copy and pasting a random move script that uses a rigid body for that, just so that we can move the character around. So let's go ahead and hit play, and let's WASD, we can move around, right? Okay, so now we want to be able to sort with this amplifier. So clearly it's not right now. So let's go ahead and hit play. Okay, and the movement script allows us to do WASD, move around, but there's no sorting with the sound amplifier. So let's exit that. And now we need to go to the settings folder where we're going to have the renderer 2D. So you can also go to assets and then search your project for renderer 2D. When you click on that, it's going to have a bunch of settings in the inspector. And the ones we care about are the transparency sort mode. So we are going to change this to custom access and then transparency sort axis, leave it as 0 for X, 1 for Y, and 0 for Z, because we are sorting with the Y axis. So now let's go ahead and hit play. Okay, and let's see if there's any sorting. So there kind of is, but I would guess that this is quite possibly not going to be perfect, because by default, when you're sorting like this, it's going to use the center point. So if you want to further customize your sorting between your objects, especially if it's a really big object like a tree, you may need to go click on the object. So I'm going to click on the amplifier here and change the sprite sorting point from center to pivot. So now it's going to sort with the pivot point down here. And let's go to the pre-made character, and we're also going to use sprite sort point pivot. So now when we hit play and we're sorting from the pivot points of our two objects, let's move into the amplifier again. And now the point at which we move behind the object is a little bit further down. So if this sorting looks good to you, then you don't need to change anything else. Otherwise, you would possibly just need to adjust the pivot point on all of your sprite frames. In reality, once you add in box colliders and collision, you wouldn't be able to even walk this far, because you'd have a box collider right here and a box collider right here, or some other kind of colliders, and you wouldn't be able to just walk straight through the amplifier. But how I would set this up is that you wouldn't have a collider up here. So in your actual game, what you'd be able to do is just walk behind the object just like this, and this is when that Y sorting really matters, because walking behind an object in a 2D game is actually pretty normal. You wouldn't generally walk into the object like this, so that's not what we're concerned about. It's going behind objects like this. So as long as you're doing transparency sort mode, custom access Y for 1, then that's going to basically get you to where you need to go for your Y sorting in your 2D game. From this point, just make sure that your movement script accounts for collisions if you're having your character in a kinematic rigid body mode, because then you need to manually code the collisions, and that all of your objects actually have colliders so that you can't just walk through them, but you should be able to walk behind the objects. But that, in a nutshell, is how you do Y sorting inside of Unity Engine. So I hope that this video was fairly easy to understand. Thanks for watching to the end. I've been Chris, and I will see all of you in my future video content.